You know that smug feeling you get when you're absolutely certain you're right about something? When you've spent years, decades even, building an entire identity around being the smartest person in the room. Yeah, I had that. For 47 years, I was that guy. The one who'd corner you at parties and dismantle your faith with logic and reason. The one who had a Richard Dawkins quote ready for every occasion. The one who literally wrote a blog called The Rational Skeptic with over 200,000 followers. And then I died. Not metaphorically, not spiritually. I actually, clinically died on an operating table during what was supposed to be a routine surgery. And let me tell you, the irony of a hardcore atheist meeting God is not lost on me. In fact, the first thing I said to him was, "I'm so sorry, but I'm getting ahead of myself." My name is David, and this is the story of how I went from being the guy who thought religious people were delusional to being the guy who had to eat the biggest slice of humble pie in human history. And trust me, it did not taste good. Let me paint you a picture of who I was before this happened. I wasn't just passively non-religious. I was aggressively, militantly atheistic. I had a YouTube channel with 50,000 subscribers where I'd debate pastors, priests, and anyone else who believed in what I called Bronze Age fairy tales. I'd written 2 books, The God Delusion and Faith Humanity's Longest-Running Scam. I was that insufferable. My wife Sarah used to joke that I treated atheism like a religion, which would make me incredibly angry because obviously that completely missed the point. Looking back, she was absolutely right. I had turned skepticism into dogma. I had made a god out of not believing in God. The cognitive dissonance is almost funny now. Almost. Every Christmas, while my wife's family prayed before dinner, I'd sit there with my arms crossed, making a point of not bowing my head. When my mother was dying of cancer and found comfort in her faith, I actually, and I'm ashamed of this, tried to convince her that heaven wasn't real, at her deathbed, my own mother. Sarah barely spoke to me for weeks after that. She said I had turned into someone she didn't recognize, that my need to be right had made me cruel. She wasn't wrong, but I couldn't see it. I genuinely believed I was helping people by freeing them from superstition. I thought I was doing noble work. Every person I argued with, every belief I dismantled, every time someone told me I'd made them question their faith, I counted it as a victory. I kept a running tally. Seriously. I had a spreadsheet. Who does that? Who keeps a spreadsheet of people they've converted to atheism? A fanatic, that's who. But I couldn't see it because I was wrapped up in my own self-righteousness. Then came February 14th, Valentine's Day. The day that would change everything. I'd been having these chest pains for a few weeks, sharp, stabbing sensations that would come and go. Being the rational, logical person I was, I ignored them because acknowledging vulnerability didn't fit my self-image. But Sarah insisted I see a doctor. Turns out I needed emergency heart surgery, a quintuple bypass, at 47 years old. The surgeon, Dr. Morrison, explained the procedure to me. He was calm, professional, experienced. He'd done thousands of these operations. The success rate was over 98%. Routine, he said. I'd be fine. See you on the other side, he said as they wheeled me into the operating room. I almost made a joke about how there was no other side, but the anesthesia kicked in before I could. And that's when everything went sideways. Here's what I learned later, 7 minutes into the surgery. My heart stopped. Just stopped. Completely. The monitors flatlined. Dr. Morrison and his team worked frantically to revive me. They shocked me once. Nothing. Twice. Nothing. They performed manual compressions. They tried everything in their considerable arsenal of medical intervention. For 4 minutes and 37 seconds, I was clinically dead. No heartbeat, no brain activity. Gone. But here's the thing. I wasn't gone. I was somewhere else entirely. The moment my heart stopped, I was suddenly standing in a space that I can only describe as infinite. It wasn't dark. It wasn't light. It was both and neither. Have you ever tried to remember what it was like before you were born? That absence of everything. This was the opposite. It was the presence of everything. every color that existed and colors that couldn't exist, every sound, every silence, all happening simultaneously. And I wasn't alone. There was a presence there. Not a person exactly, but not a person either. It was like trying to look at something that existed in more dimensions than my mind could process. The best way I can describe it is imagine trying to see a sphere when you've only ever understood 2 dimensions. You know there's something there, something beyond your comprehension, but you can't quite grasp it. And this presence radiated something I can only call love. But not the kind of love I'd known. This was love that was simultaneously gentle and overwhelming, personal and cosmic, completely accepting and yet somehow making me aware of every single thing I'd ever done wrong. Which was a long list. And I knew, without words, without explanation, I just knew. This was God. The God I'd spent 25 years denying, mocking, actively working to disprove. The God I'd written 2 books claiming didn't exist. The God whose followers I'd called delusional. That God, standing right there, or everywhere, or nowhere. Space didn't work right in this place. My first thought was a very eloquent, oh no. My second thought was, this is going to be really, really bad. And you know what God did? He laughed, not mockingly, not cruelly. It was warm, genuinely amused laughter, like a parent watching their kid finally figure out a puzzle they'd been struggling with. And somehow, through this laughter, I understood something he'd never been angry with me. Not once. Not for a single second of my entire crusade against him. That somehow made it worse. If he'd been angry, I could have handled that. I was prepared for cosmic punishment. I'd mentally prepared myself for hell, actually, in the unlikely event it existed. But this patient, loving amusement, I had no defense against that. And then the review started. I saw my life, but not like watching a movie. I experienced it. Every moment, every choice, every word. But I experienced it from everyone else's perspective too. I felt what my mother felt when I tried to take away her dying comfort. I felt my wife's pain when I chose being right over being kind. I felt the hurt of every person I'd sneered at, every believer I'd made feel small, every doubter I'd pushed away from seeking something beyond themselves. I felt it all, simultaneously. The cumulative weight of every casual cruelty I'd committed in the name of rationality. It was crushing. But here's what broke me. I also saw the moments where I could have chosen differently. The times when someone reached out for connection and I shut them down with logic. The conversations where someone was really asking for hope and I gave them nihilism instead. The hundreds of tiny opportunities I'd had to be kind instead of right, and I chose right every single time. And through all of it, this presence, God, was there. Present in every moment of my life, even when I was actively denying his existence. Especially then, hoping I'd turn around, waiting patiently, never forcing, never demanding, just there. I broke down. I don't know if you can cry without a body, but I did, and the words just poured out of me. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I'm just going to say he, because that's the closest my limited language can get. He communicated something to me. Not in words, but in pure understanding. He showed me that the apologizing wasn't necessary because he'd already forgiven me. That he'd forgiven me before I'd even done anything that needed forgiving. That his love wasn't conditional on my belief or my behavior. That love just was. Like gravity. Like physics. Fundamental to the structure of reality itself. And that's when I understood the cosmic joke I'd been living. I'd spent decades arguing that God didn't exist while unconsciously sensing that something greater was out there. I'd taken that longing, that intuition, and weaponized it into skepticism. I'd felt the pull toward meaning and convinced myself it was just neurons firing. I'd experienced love and beauty and transcendence and reduced it all to biology and chemistry. I hadn't been enlightened. I'd been actively, willfully ignorant. God showed me something else too. He showed me that faith wasn't the opposite of reason. It was a different kind of knowing. That mystery wasn't the enemy of truth. It was an invitation to humility. That science could explain the how, but it would never fully capture the why or the who. He showed me that I could have had both, that I'd created a false dichotomy, erected walls that didn't need to exist, that some of the greatest scientists in history, Newton, Kepler, Faraday, had somehow managed to pursue rational inquiry while maintaining wonder at the divine. But I'd been too proud, too certain, too afraid of being wrong to ever consider I might be. And then he gave me a choice. I could stay. I could remain in this space beyond space, this presence of love and acceptance. Or I could go back. Back to my body, my life, my wife. Back to the world I'd thought I understood but clearly didn't. It wasn't even a hard choice. I had to go back. I had to tell Sarah I was sorry. I had to try to undo even a fraction of the damage I'd done. I had to live differently.
But before I left, I asked a question. Why did you let me spend all those years fighting against you? Why didn't you stop me? And the answer was simple, profound, and somehow perfectly him, because I love you enough to let you choose. Even when you choose wrong, even when you choose against me, love that forces isn't love, it's control. And then I was back. The crash cart. Dr. Morrison's worried face, Sarah's hand in mine, beeping monitors, fluorescent lights, the sterile smell of the hospital, pain, so much pain. But I was alive. The surgery was completed. I survived. Dr. Morrison later told me it was the closest call he'd had in 15 years. 4.5 minutes with no heartbeat. He said I was lucky. I knew better. I'd been given a second chance. The first thing I did when I could speak was ask for my wife. When she came in, tears streaming down her face, I said 3 words. You were right. She knew immediately what I meant. Because Sarah had never stopped believing. Even when married to the world's most insufferable atheist, she'd quietly maintained her faith. She'd prayed for me when I mocked prayer. She'd attended church when I called it a waste of time. She'd loved me through my worst self. The recovery was long. Physically, it took months. Emotionally and spiritually, I'm still recovering. I shut down my YouTube channel. I stopped the blog. I issued apologies, public and private, to people I'd hurt. Most accepted, some didn't. I understood. I didn't become a street preacher or a televangelist. I didn't write a book called The Atheist Who Met God, though my publisher begged me to. I'm telling this story now, here, because enough time has passed that I can talk about it without the rawness overwhelming me. What I did do was simple. I started living like someone who'd seen what I'd seen. Like someone who knew, absolutely knew, that this life wasn't all there is, that every interaction mattered, that kindness wasn't weakness, that mystery was beautiful, that I didn't need to have all the answers. I started going to church with Sarah. I sit in the back, usually. I still struggle with some of the theology. I still ask questions. But now the questions come from curiosity, not from a desire to destroy. I've learned that faith isn't about certainty, it's about trust. That doubt isn't the opposite of faith, it's an element of it. That the most honest prayer might be I believe. Help my unbelief. People ask me sometimes if I'm certain about what I experienced, if I know it was real and not just a hallucination caused by oxygen deprivation or DMT released by my dying brain. The old me would have jumped at that explanation, would have found comfort in reducing the transcendent to the chemical. But here's what I know: that experience changed me in ways that a hallucination couldn't. It broke through decades of conditioning, pride, and self-deception in 4.5 minutes. It made me a better husband, a kinder person, someone who can actually listen instead of just waiting to argue. Was it real? I died on an operating table and met God. He laughed at my hubris, showed me my life, offered me forgiveness I didn't deserve, and sent me back with a mission to live differently. What feels more delusional, believing that happened, or believing that random chemical reactions could fundamentally restructure someone's entire worldview and personality in less than 5 minutes? I spent half my life trying to disprove God. Turns out, he didn't need to prove anything to me. He just waited patiently for me to figure it out. And when I finally did, when I finally saw clearly, the first thing I needed to say was the thing I'd been too proud to say my entire life. I was wrong. I was dead wrong. And I've never been more grateful to admit it.